So welcome to today's Wednesday webinar. It's Kevin from Smart here. Thank you for attending. We have Crystal is our moderator.
Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yeah, I did hit start broadcast and it said it was. Hey, it's Kevin from Smart here. Welcome to today's Wednesday webinar. We also have Crystal Ryan's our moderator, and Crystal will take questions. If you do have any questions, please just put them in the chat or the questions section of the chat pod. And away we go. So today is really about the question of should we be going interactive in our classrooms. So there's been a lot of discussion around cost versus functionality. I know a lot of schools that we go into are putting up flat screen TVs or interactive projectors. Cheaper option than an interactive flat screen panel or an interactive board at the front of the school. But I suppose the question we're asking is, are you getting return for your expenditure in terms of improved learning outcomes for kids? So as we know, students are highly visual and tactile these days. You only have to see a 2-year-old with an iPad to understand the attraction that they have for these devices. One question to ask your students, I always think, which is interesting, is how many screens or devices do they deal with at home, and also how will they learn something at home. But I think part of what we've got to do is we've got to trap that stimulating environment and bring it into the classroom to leverage this at schools. So I think about my own schooling and a teacher standing at sometimes a blackboard, but sometimes a whiteboard and writing and me passively copying. I don't know sometimes if that's really good learning, and also I'm not 100% sure that sometimes just showing PowerPoint or film on a projector is good learning. So I think we really need kids to be engaged, and that's what interactivity offers us. So we've got several models for the front of room display. The one I've mentioned, the old whiteboard and the marker, and they're ubiquitous. Every classroom I go in, no matter what the display is, they're still there. It's really the teacher's comfort zone. We have the old overheads. We've got IWBs, a lot, as we know, are coming towards end of life and a lot are being replaced. We have projectors, interactive projectors, flat screen TVs and interactive panels. So they're probably the options for front of room at the moment. So the question probably we need to ask about that is, again, price versus functionality. So if we just have a little look, we did mention in our title that why is secondary different. Uptake for technology in schools, fantastic, but primary schools tend to take more ownership of their room. They'll often have, they won't be moving in and out of that space, whereas secondaries are. And sometimes secondaries are across several different devices as they go from room to room. So it's not as easy for secondaries as it is for primaries to move forward with this stuff sometimes, although some secondaries are doing a great job. To get a head around this, I think we really need to look at the research, and we quite often populate our SMART website, which I'll show you at the end of the webinar, with research articles and blogs. But the ones that I would point you to is the OEC report, Students, Computers and Learning, which really pointed to the fact that it's about teacher PD. The Horizon report, which if you're an e-learning leader in a school or you're on an e-learning committee, I'd strongly recommend you read the Horizon report to really future-proof your school. And SMART also commissions its own research around interactivity and what it means to teaching and learning in classrooms. And we'll probably be able to make that teaching and technology and learning article available to you. So, pardon me. The Fogarty results, quite interesting. I'll just leave that slide up there for a second so you can read it. They did several experiments with kids to see about retention, recall and understanding. And what they did was really took kids up to boards and gave them an interactive experience, and then looked at how they performed, what their recall was like, etc. And if you look at the figures down the bottom, that's probably the key part. Significant increase in those areas for students who went to the board. And really that's probably what today's thematic is. the whole thing with students is really we need to be getting up to those interactive spaces at the front of the room. All the research that was done, and there was some very significant research done by a group called Bector, the British Communication and Technology Agency. Unfortunately, they've been defunded since 2011, but their research is archived. Basically, what they did was in Parliament, somebody stood up and in opposition and basically said, look, we've put millions and millions of dollars into interactive whiteboards, and can we categorically prove that they're improving learning outcomes for students? And so Bector took on all that research in a very thorough way. They did a whole lot of going into classrooms, seeing what happened, and their findings were basically this, and it's probably not uncommon in Australia as well. Basically, the whiteboard may not be used due to lack of teacher training. 2, it might be just used for film and PowerPoint, which is very passive and not the teacher interacting. 3, they had teachers who used interactive software like our notebook software, which I'm presenting in, and did it very, very well. But where they saw that spike in learning outcomes was where the front of room display was used with students as well, and they had an interactive experience at the front of room display. And that's a key finding that we need to be replicating in our classrooms. So a lot of schools I go into, and I understand entirely it's a question of cost versus effectiveness, but a lot of schools are opting for a combination of an iPad attached to a flat screen TV, which then the iPad is used to create interactivity to the flat screen TV. I've got a lot of reservations about that model, only because I've read a lot about what makes a good teacher. And what makes a good teacher is eye contact, voice, sometimes physical presence, and those thous and other things that teachers do. But what happens in this model is the iPad creates the interactivity, but it also becomes the teaching space. So basically, if we look at our teacher here, they're focused on the iPad. All that stuff that makes a good teacher disappears. So I think an interactive space is a significantly better model than the kind of model we're seeing here. So what does it mean to classroom delivery? I think the most important thing that I'll stress again is really the interactive whiteboard or the interactive flat screen at the front of the room has been seen largely as a teacher space. But really we should be looking at it as a teaching and learning space, one that we rotate kids through and give kids opportunities with as well. So how do we do that? I'm just going to give you 3 really quick examples of what might be done. And again, I'm using our notebook software. Our notebook software is designed with students in mind, as is our hardware. So just really quickly, here's 3 little models that we could use. So I'm just using a lab activity from Notebook, very simple one. Basically, I drag if I get a prime number correct or not. So very simple. So let's assume I've explained prime numbers in the classroom. I've then just got 2 students up to the board. I've got them to have this experience, and then if I want to, I can set a timer to generate a bit more interest. But basically I then have those 2 students turn and explain to the class what they did and why they did it. So the students having an interactive experience at the board, turning to explain. The next example I've got is in Notebook, our GeoGebra widget. So in this example, basically, once it loads, basically we want the students to look at the formula and track the parabola and try and do that. So how might we use this? I'm just going to show you very quickly. I want to rotate 4 to 5 groups of students through this activity. Very quickly I can clone that page in my notebook, so I get an exact copy. So I can create 5 pages for 5 different groups of students. Under each of those pages I can actually add a blank page. So what that allows me to do is I have 4 or 5 students rotating through this space. They actually do the exercise, and then what I do is I get them to write So, and I'm just going to use my mouse to write on that blank page, but if you imagine the students are writing their understanding, really easy at the smart interactive panel because they just pick up the pen. It's just like a whiteboard marker. So, but here they write. Why do we do it 3 or 4 times? It's so all the kids can rotate through the workspace at the front. They can all have an interactive experience. And what I strongly recommend is that we save that and we actually take that into our planning meeting and we discuss how those students went with this exercise and allow that to determine how to improve our curriculum. The third example I've got is just a really basic one. Don't forget students highly tactile visual. So here I've got a little 3D model of a heart. I always ask teachers this: would students want to come up and have this experience? I think the answer is fairly obvious. So very easy to do. Our flat screen panels, they behave like big iPads. So student comes up, puts their finger on that model and the model rotates. So how can I improve the learning with that? I know the students will want to come to the board, so I've got to look for the learning opportunity. With any of these 3D models, if we assume we're doing physiology, so I right click, I can then add a label to the 3D model. So I think that is one of the chambers of the heart. I can then have my students turn and explain the model, and notice that the label stays with the object. They turn and explain their labeling. So concept is 4 or 5 groups in the room. One of the rotation points is the front of room display to give the students an interactive experience at the board. Again, we can save and trap that. We can add a page, students can write their understanding, but basically we're certainly, and I'll just go back to that previous slide, by just using SMART's hardware and software and the opportunities that it presents us, we're certainly in this territory here, which we know improves learning outcomes for students. And that's really what our investment into the technology is about. So the third part for me, which is very important, and it came out very strongly in that OECD report, is that without teachers being trained in software and how to use it and rethinking pedagogy and curriculum, we don't get the outcomes we want. So this first part, teaching practice, really, really important, and that you actually have an idea of how you're going to roll out your technology, what it's going to mean to teachers and students and learning outcomes. Then next part, let's look at our educational software. Let's make sure it suits our needs, and let's look at our hardware. It's with those 3 elements together that we get success and improved learning outcomes. It's not about just one or the other. So I often think of the TPAC model, and I'm not sure if you've actually seen TPAC or SAMA, but really good models to make us think about e-learning in the classroom and how it can improve learning outcomes. But the TPAC model, I've borrowed on that. So really we need 3 critical things working in harmony. 1, the teacher knows and uses the software, and professional learning is significantly important. 2, the hardware is intuitive and inviting for students. So interactive projector that tracks the pen. Students who use iPads, they're used to coming up and manipulating with their hands and fingers. That's not necessarily an intuitive experience. And then the third one, the software has lots of opportunities for students to interact at the front. So basically the model is training hardware and software, and that's the model that SMART have worked very hard at in terms of putting things in place that are about not just teachers, not just students, but creating teaching and learning opportunities in classrooms. So I've probably gone through that fairly quickly, but there may be a couple of questions, and we will be posting this on the website, and I'll show you the website in a second. So Crystal, are there any questions from participants?
Hi Kev, I've got a couple of questions here. First question,
Yep.
does the model you're describing preclude the teacher from using the board?
No, very good question. No, not at all. The interactive space at the front of the room is certainly the teaching space still, but what we're trying to do is get students up there as well. And in fact, I'd recommend, if you're going to change your classroom practice, to bring groups of students or individual students up, that in the first instance you strongly support that at the front of the room with those groups of students. Eventually, they'll well, they'll run the show. We know what they're like. So I just think of students manipulating that heart and doing that kind of stuff, or having an experience with that GeoGebra exercise. But in the first place, no, it's certainly still the teaching space, but we're just trying to bring students through it because we know that that's interaction at the front of the room is what improves learning outcomes. So any other questions, Crystal? Or
Got one more here for you. What's a good way to start
Yep.
bringing the students to the board?
Oh, great question. So if you haven't done this before, probably the best way is to think about a little topic that you're doing at the moment, one of your units of work. In your planning meeting, I would suggest you put your unit of work into Notebook or similar software, and actually inject as a team opportunities for students to have interactive experiences, like I've done with my 3 little examples. You could go to Smart Exchange. You'll probably find there's 3D objects there already related to your topic. You may even find there's a notebook there related to your topic, but you're actively looking for, this is not the teacher curriculum content display, this is me looking for opportunities for students to come to the board. So, but that's a great question. Thank you for that. So any other questions, Crystal?
That's it for now. Thanks, Kev.
That's right. I'll just pop up the Smart website. So we're here, Smart ANZ. So anz.smarttech.com. It's in the bottom of my signature block. So here we post these webinars. They're also on YouTube. There's blogs, there's resources, there's research, and also there's a place to contact us. So if you want to get in touch, if there's things that you'd like covered off in these webinars, please feel free to just send us an email and we'll cover off anything you'd like. Thank you for your attention today. Really appreciate it. I know you're all busy people, and look forward to talking to you again next week. Thanks, Crystal. We'll end it there.